The knock on the door came just after 8 a.m., sharp, like it had been rehearsed. Amara wiped her flour-dusted hands on the hem of her apron and opened the door halfway, squinting into the pale morning light that a man in a navy suit stood on the other side, holding a sleek black envelope sealed with a gold crest. Whitmore and Whitmore, embossed and smug. Delivery for Ms. Amara Bishop, he said, tone clipped, not quite meeting her eye. From Mr. Charles Whitmore III. She stared at the envelope like it might bite her. I didn't order anything, she said. It's not an order, he replied, placing the envelope on her welcome mat. It's an invitation. He gave a short nod, turned, and disappeared down the hallway like a ghost on salary. Amara didn't pick it up right away. She stood in the doorway for a full minute, arms crossed, pulse doing strange things. Why now? She hadn't heard his name aloud in over 2 years. Hadn't spoken it in 3. But even now, it rattled something in her, like the sound of keys unlocking a door she'd tried to brick shut. She finally bent and picked it up, peeling back the seal. The card inside was thick, linen weight, the kind meant to impress. The Whitmore family cordially invites you to the wedding of Charles Whitmore III and Madison Bellefontaine. Saturday, June 4th, Whitmore Estate Gardens, Hudson Valley dress, formal, RSVP required, and scribbled just beneath, in Charles's unmistakable sharp handwriting. I thought you'd enjoy seeing what you missed. Her throat tightened. Her fingers curled. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a weapon. Later that night, in the cramped kitchen of their shared apartment, her best friend Gia slammed her wine glass on the table. Tell me you're not actually considering going. Amara said nothing. She was slicing lemons with methodical precision. Gia leaned in, eyes wide. You do realize he's trying to humiliate you, right? That's not a wedding invitation. It's a flex. Some twisted power move. Amara's voice was flat. I know. So why even entertain it? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the living room, where her son, Micah, sat on the floor with a half-finished coloring book, softly humming a lullaby Amara used to sing when he was a baby. Because sometimes, she said slowly, you walk into the fire not to burn, but to show you survived it. Gia raised a brow. That's poetic. But is it worth the risk? Amara stared at the coloring book on the floor. The little boy with his father's dimples. The child Charles had never once acknowledged. I'm not going as an ex-girlfriend, Amara said. I'm going as the ending he thought he escaped. 3 days before the wedding, Amara sat at her vanity, holding up the dress. It was sleek, understated, black, not a trace of mourning. More like armor stitched from shadow. She ran her fingers along the fabric, her mind drifting back to the last time she saw Charles. That it had been raining that day. She'd shown him the pregnancy test in her shaking hands, her voice barely audible. I'm keeping it. Charles had stared at her, unmoved. You think this baby makes you permanent? He had whispered. You'll regret this. One day, I'll make sure of it. And then he left at no calls. No money. Just absence. And the sound of his mother's voice on the voicemail she never erased. Don't come near my son again. You're not his future. You're a mistake. But Micah had been anything but that. He was warm skin against hers in the NICU. He was giggles in the bath. He was the reason she stayed up studying until dawn, even with swollen ankles and no support. He was hers. Gia watched from the hallway as Amara applied a final touch of eyeliner. You sure you don't want me to come with? Gia asked. Be your moral support? Or, I don't know, throw a wine glass if someone says the wrong thing. Amara chuckled softly. Tempting. You're not going for revenge, right? No, Amara's voice was low. Steady. I'm going to show him that the thing he thought would destroy me is the very thing that made me whole. Gia exhaled. That's some next-level healing, girl. Amara didn't say what she was actually feeling, because healing was too soft a word. For this wasn't closure. This was reclamation. She bent down, gently waking Micah from his nap. Hey, baby, ready for a little trip? Micah rubbed his eyes, then reached for her hand instinctively. Amara held it tightly. She wasn't going for drama. She wasn't going for him. She was going for the little boy who deserved to see what dignity looked like in the face of power. The Whitmore estate was everything she remembered and more. Marble fountains, sculpted gardens, guests in designer gowns sipping imported champagne. That it felt like walking into the set of a movie she was never cast in. Heads turned when she stepped in. A few narrowed their eyes. Some recognized her. Others just whispered. She kept her back straight, her steps even. Micah walked beside her, dressed in a tiny suit Gia had tailored herself. And as they passed under the archway of flowers and chandeliers, Amara whispered to her son, "Remember, baby, there is nothing small about being true." He looked up at her with his big brown eyes, and for the first time since that envelope had landed on her doorstep, Amara smiled. They met at Columbia. He was the polished legacy law student. Tailored suits, family yacht, internships handed down. Like cufflinks, she was the scholarship girl who had to fight for everything, including her seat in that constitutional law seminar where she first saw him. Charles Whitmore III walked in late, apologizing only to the professor. Not the class, not her. And yet, when he sat beside her and whispered, "Do we like this professor, or are we surviving him?" Amara smiled. That smile would cost her everything. Their first date was jazz and bourbon. He took her to a rooftop lounge in Tribeca where the host called him by name and the bartender already had his order ready. "You have a favorite table?" she asked, amused. "I have favorite people," he replied, staring at her like she was dessert that it should have. Felt like a red flag. It felt like validation instead. By month 2, they were inseparable. By month 5, she had learned to laugh off the sideways stares when he held her hand in his parents' country club. By month 8, she knew all the names of his ancestors embroidered on the Whitmore estate's tapestry, but his mother still called her Amanda. And by month 11, she was pregnant. Amara hadn't planned it. She'd been careful, but life, like privilege, doesn't always follow the rules. She found out on a rainy Friday night, kneeling on the tile floor of their shared apartment bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines and feeling her lungs collapse. Charles walked in mid-sob. "What happened?" he asked, genuinely alarmed. "Are you hurt?" She held up the stick, unable to form the words. His face changed, like someone turned down the light behind his eyes. "No," he whispered. "You're not. You can't be serious." She nodded. "Amara, this can't happen right now." His voice wasn't angry. It was scared. Entitled, "Charles, I'm up for a fellowship in London. My mother just brought me into the trust. Bored. You know how this looks." "How this looks?" she said, her voice cracking. "It's not a tabloid headline, Charles. It's a child. A child you decided on without me. That's not fair. Neither is this timing." She stood up slowly, something cold settling in her gut. "I'm not getting rid of it." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't have to decide right now. I just did." That silence between them, it was the end already. Neither of them said it, but both of them knew. The next day, his mother called. Vivian Whitmore didn't believe in wasting time on pleasantries. "I thought we raised Charles better," she said, voice sharp as bone china. "But men make foolish mistakes when enticed." "Excuse me," Amara asked. "We understand this situation is difficult for you, but we'd prefer it resolved quietly. This situation is a baby you think connects you to a family you don't belong to." Amara's hands clenched around the phone. "You don't scare me, Mrs. Whitmore." "You should be scared," Vivian replied, almost gently, "because you don't know the storm you've walked into." She hung up before Amara could respond. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was deafening. Charles stopped coming home that week. His toothbrush vanished. His suits, his cologne, even the mug he'd claimed as his from her kitchen. She found a check slipped under the door. $15,000. No note. No signature. Just money, like hush, like shame. She ripped it in half, then quarters, then eighths, and flushed them, piece by piece. Her best friend Gia came over the next night and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by books and unopened prenatal vitamins. "He didn't even fight," Amara whispered. "Not for me. Not for the baby. Because fighting means caring," Gia said, her voice heavy. "And Charles never had to learn how to care when money could do it for him." Amara swallowed hard. What if this kid grows up wondering why he was never enough? Then you tell him the truth, that his mom was enough for 2. The weeks turned into months. Her belly grew. Her world shrank in, oh, baby shower. No co-parenting plans. Just her and the mirror. She finished her semester while throwing up between classes. She delivered food at night until her ankles gave out. And every now and then, she still checked his Instagram. Charles wasn't in London, he was in the Hamptons. On yachts. At galas. With Madison Fontaine. the same woman he once called vapid, and now his fiancée. The birth was hard. Micah was small, quiet, but when she held him, he fit so perfectly against her chest it felt like he'd always been there. No one came to visit, no flowers. No messages. Only Gia, who cried harder than the baby and whispered, "You did it, Mama. You really did it." 1 week later, a courier delivered another envelope, this time from a lawyer. Charles Whitmore 3 legally disavows any parental claim or obligation. He was officially denying her child. The paper was cold, sterile, final. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She folded the letter, put it in Micah's baby box, and whispered to him, "One day, you'll know your story. But not today." She returned to school 6 months later, exhausted and broke, but fire-I'd be why then. Whispers had begun circulating in academic circles about the Whitmore girl, as they called her, about how she tried to trap Charles. The rumors didn't come from nowhere. They came from carefully planted places. One day, during a guest lecture on legal ethics, the professor used a hypothetical. What if a woman keeps a child against a man's will? Is that unethical? The room laughed. A few glanced at Amara. She stood up, calm and clear. "Pregnancy isn't coercion," she said. "Silencing women with power and money is." The professor stammered. The class went silent, but Amara sat down with her spine straight. That was the day she stopped asking for space and started taking it. There are places you enter not to be welcomed, but to be remembered. The Whitmore estate looked like it hadn't changed in 3 years. It still reeked of white roses, old money, and colder hearts. Statues guarded the entrance like secrets, and champagne flutes clinked in a symphony of inherited laughter. Amara stepped from the town car, heels sinking slightly into the manicured gravel. She adjusted the collar of her tailored black dress, then extended her hand. Micah took it without hesitation. He wore a miniature suit, navy blue with a gold handkerchief, Gia's touch, of course. His curls were neatly combed, and he held her fingers with the trust only a child who's never known rejection can still offer. "Is this a party?" he whispered. Her voice was even. "Something like that." They passed the front gates. Guests turned. Conversations paused like someone had hit mute on the universe. No one said her name, but she saw the recognition bloom. The black girl who made a scene 3 years ago, the ex with the scandal baby, now here, like a ghost in satin and heels. Amara didn't flinch. She walked as if she belonged, because her son did. The ceremony space was carved into the hillside, a wide-open lawn wrapped in strings of glass lanterns and blooming hydrangeas. Rows of white chairs faced a massive arch draped in sheer silk. At the altar stood Charles. Even from this distance, she could see him stiffen when he noticed her. That he blinked. Once, twice. Then his jaw set. That he didn't move. His bride, Madison Fontaine, tall, blonde, pristine, followed his gaze. Then she turned, looked back, and saw them. Her brows furrowed. Her lips parted. She whispered something to her maid of honor. Then she started walking. Amara and Micah reached the first row just as Madison intercepted them. "Excuse me," Madison said, holding up a hand like a stop sign. Her voice was syrupy, but the edges were serrated. "Are you lost?" Amara tilted her head slightly. "Not in the slightest." Madison gave a practiced laugh. "This is a private event." "I know." "Then, why are you here?" Amara leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so only Madison could hear. "Because your groom invited me once," she said, "when he thought I'd stay broken." Madison blinked, confused. "And I brought his son," Amara added softly. "Because he deserves to see what cowardice looks like up close." Gasps didn't just ripple, they crashed. People turned in their seats. Whispers ignited. Phones lifted. Charles stepped forward from the altar. "Amara," he said, voice tight. She turned. Slowly. "Hello, Charles." His eyes dropped to Micah, who clutched Amara's hand like a lifeline. Charles didn't speak. His mouth opened, then closed again. The silence made Madison's voice ring louder. "Wait, what?" she asked. "Is this a joke?" Amara said nothing. Madison turned to Charles. "Charles." He looked pale now, like his insides were collapsing. "Who is that child?" Madison hissed. When he didn't answer, Amara smiled, slow and precise. "You should ask him," she said. "I did. Once." She guided Micah forward, took a seat in the front row, and crossed her legs as if this were any ordinary afternoon recital. Micah looked up. "Is that my daddy?" A few people gasped audibly. Amara didn't break eye contact with Charles. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. "That's the man who left us." Charles stepped down from the altar, unsteady. "Amara, we're not doing this here. You invited me, remember?" She gestured vaguely at the garden. "I came to see what I missed." Madison turned fully now, trembling. "Charles, what the hell is she talking about?" Charles grabbed Amara's arm, low and discreet. "You've made your point." She gently removed his hand. "No, Charles. You made the point. I'm just the echo." Security moved in. A man in a headset murmured into his sleeve, but Amara reached into her bag and handed over a slim manila folder. "Court-ordered paternity results. Dated. Verified. Filed." The guard looked to Charles, who stared down like the ground would open and swallow him whole. Amara stood. "I'll leave now," she said. "Not for you, but for him." She turned to Madison one last time. "Marrying him won't erase the lies. Only delay them." Then to the crowd. "Enjoy the ceremony." She turned, took Micah's hand again, and walked, graceful, quiet, defiant. Behind her, the Whitmore empire cracked, and no one, not even the bride, could pretend they hadn't heard it. Viral fame doesn't knock that IT slams the door open with. No warning to be why the time Amara and Micah stepped into their small apartment that night. The internet had already devoured her walk-in like it was dessert. A guest video, shot slightly shaky from the second row, was posted with the caption, "Groom's Black X shows up to wedding with his son, drops bombshell." It had 1 million views in under 4 hours. By dawn, it hit 12. Gia called first. "Girl, you broke the internet." Amara pressed her phone between her shoulder and cheek while tucking Micah into bed. "I didn't break anything," she said. "He did." "Yeah. Well, you made sure everyone saw the fracture lines." On TV, a split screen played on mute. Charles's frozen face on the left, Amara's calm expression on the right, and Micah in between like living evidence. The Whitmore wedding scandal. Amara sat down slowly at the edge of the bed. "I didn't want it like this." "I know," Gia said, "but sometimes justice comes louder than we planned." But the camera didn't catch what happened next. After Amara walked out, back at the estate, chaos swallowed the perfect ceremony whole. Madison was screaming. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. "Is it true?" she shrieked, grabbing Charles by the lapels. "Tell me it's a setup." Charles didn't answer. He couldn't. Because what do you say when your past arrives in a tailored dress holding your unacknowledged future? "You used me," she shouted. "You let me stand next to you while your damn son sat in the front row." "I didn't know she'd come," he murmured, dazed. "But you knew he existed," she roared. "You let me plan a wedding over a secret burial." Vivian Whitmore tried to intervene. "This isn't the place." Madison spun around. "Don't start. I bet you helped cover this up." Vivian's face didn't flinch. She had practiced this expression her entire life. Unbothered and untouchable. "You don't understand the world we live in, dear." "I understand spin. I understand shame," Madison hissed. "And I understand that your family just ruined mine." Then another voice cut through the din deeper. Male. Cold. Senator Fontaine had arrived. "You," he said, pointing at Amara's folder still clutched in the hands of security. "Let me see that." The head guard handed it over without protest. Vivian stepped forward. "Senator, surely you realize this is a fabrication." He opened the folder, scanned the paperwork, then looked up with dead eyes. "It's court certified. Dated over 2 years ago. Filed in New York County." Silence. Madison covered her mouth. "Jesus." The senator turned to Charles, voice like ice scraping metal. "You're finished." By Monday, headlines had metastasized. Billionaire groom has secret son with former girlfriend. Charles Whitmore's wedding crashes into scandal. Bride walks out. Groom's mother accused of cover-up. Clips of Amara walking past. Guests played in slow motion on national news. Twitter called her the real bride. Instagram influencers turned her into a meme. But beneath the noise, in the quiet dark of her apartment, Amara held Micah and stared at the ceiling. The attention wasn't protection. It was spotlight. And with spotlight came shadow. The call from Whitmore and Whitmore's legal team came at 7:42 a.m. A man with an apologetic tone and a predator's patience. Ms. Bishop, we'd like to resolve this amicably. I'm not interested in quiet deals, she said flatly. You misunderstand. The family is willing to offer a financial agreement, retroactive support, and privacy contracts. They simply wish to avoid further spectacle. Amara glanced toward the stack of bills on the table, then to her son, eating cereal while humming the Spider-Man theme. No, excuse me. No NDAs. No check. No silence. There was a pause, a breath, then a warning. Ms. Bishop, if you pursue this in court, it will become unpleasant for you and for the child. Her voice didn't waver. Good. Because life has already been unpleasant. She hung up. By Wednesday, the fallout was radioactive. Madison had wiped all wedding photos from her feed and posted a black square with the caption, "Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, not even in love." Charles's PR team scrambled that a pre-written press release emerged, likely drafted months ago for some other kind of disaster, now repurposed. Mr. Whitmore regrets the way this personal matter unfolded publicly and is focused on resolving it respectfully and legally. Amara scoffed when she read it. Regret, she muttered, is only useful when it's not curated. Meanwhile, reporters showed up outside her coffee shop job, one bold enough to follow her down the block. How long were you Charles Whitmore's secret? He asked, phone. Recording. She turned slowly, her voice cool. I was never a secret. He just never had the courage to say my name out loud. The clip went viral. Again, 2 nights later, Gia pulled her aside. Are you ready for what's coming next? Amara looked up from her laptop. Do I have a choice? You could still walk away. Say you don't want the heat. Just raise your baby in peace. Amara sighed. I tried peace. It left me broke, alone, and invisible. Gia softened. Then what's the goal now? She looked out the window where Micah was drawing on the fogged glass. I want my son to grow up knowing that silence is not the price of survival. On Friday, Madison filed to dissolve the marriage license. The wedding was legally erased before it had even been signed. That same day, Amara's inbox filled with interview requests, daytime talk shows, podcast invites, documentary pitches. One even offered her a book deal, but Amara said no to all of them. She wasn't here to become a symbol. She was here to remind Charles of what he abandoned, and to make sure her son never had to wonder why no one fought for him. And behind the polished walls of Whitmore and Whitmore's offices, the board convened in quiet panic that a scandal of this magnitude wasn't just bad optics. IT was leveraged. IT was exposure. And it was only beginning. They called it family court, but nothing about it felt like family. It felt like war disguised in marble walls and powdered wigs. Like truth had to wear a tie just to be heard. Amara sat beside her lawyer, knees locked, palms sweaty against the smooth wood of the defendant's table. Across the aisle, Charles looked like a man sculpted out of frost, still, cold, polished. He hadn't looked at her once, not even when they walked past each other in the hallway, not even when she arrived, holding the very child he claimed to want so badly. The petition had arrived 2 weeks earlier. Petitioner, Charles Whitmore 3 request, full physical and legal custody of Micah Bishop Whitmore. Grounds. Mother is emotionally unstable, financially insecure, and actively engaging in a smear campaign against petitioner and his family. Translation, she embarrassed me. She doesn't belong in our world. Now I'll take what she loves most. Amara hadn't even flinched when she read it. She'd just called Gia, made a cup of tea, and then texted the one person she hadn't spoken to in years. Naomi Pierce, ESQ Naomi, had been her criminal law professor, mentor, and the first woman who ever looked Amara in the eye and said, "You're brilliant," even when they want you silent. When Naomi read the petition, she blinked once, leaned back, and said, "This boy's playing chess with a knife." "I need your help," Amara whispered. "You've got it. I only charge one thing." "What's that?" "Don't let them see you bleed." The courtroom was full. Press seats occupied. A few influencers hiding behind sunglasses. Vivian Whitmore sat in the front row like royalty, dressed in muted gray with a string of pearls and a gaze that could cut glass. Amara didn't look at her. She looked at the judge, a woman, surprisingly middle-aged. Black. Her name was Judge Esther Rowe. That offered a sliver of comfort. Maybe even fate. Then the bailiff called the case. and everything else blurred. Charles's attorney stood. A white man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Mr. Hendricks, but spoke like a man who thought pro bono meant less than. Your Honor, he began. This is not a case of a father shirking responsibility. This is a case of a man trying to correct a situation that has gone tragically off the rails. He turned to gesture at Amara. The mother has paraded their son in front of cameras, subjected him to a media firestorm, and refuses to allow Mr. Whitmore access without public humiliation. Amara stared ahead, jaw clenched. She has no stable income, no home ownership, and no extended family support system. And we have multiple records showing instances of emotionally erratic behavior, including aggressive outbursts in professional settings. She almost laughed out loud. Aggressive outbursts. For demanding a chair in a boardroom. For raising her voice once when her paycheck was late. Naomi whispered. They'll try to paint you as unhinged. Don't let them hold the brush. Then Hendricks dropped the real blow. Furthermore, Your Honor, we are prepared to demonstrate that Ms. Bishop intentionally withheld the child from Mr. Whitmore, and that the conception itself may not have been as mutual as initially assumed. A gasp echoed in the gallery. The insinuation hit her like ice water. Even the judge looked up sharply. Naomi stood. Objection. Highly inappropriate, completely unsubstantiated, and, frankly, racist dog whistling. Wrapped in legalese. Judge Rowe's voice was firm, sustained. Watch yourself, counselor. Naomi's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Whitmore, she began, at what point did you first acknowledge Micah as your son? Charles adjusted his cufflinks. I've always known. That's not what I asked. He hesitated. When the court ordered the test. So roughly 2 years after his birth? Yes. Did you attend the birth? No. Contribute financially? I was not aware. Did you respond to any of Ms. Bishop's messages? Charles's jaw tensed. No. Did your mother contact her? A beat. Once. To threaten her? That's your characterization. Naomi smiled thinly. We'll let the voicemail speak for itself. She held up a CD and handed it to the clerk. Vivian shifted uncomfortably. Then it was Vivian's turn to testify. She walked slowly to the stand, every step measured, like the floor owed her reverence. Mrs. Whitmore, Hendricks began gently. How would you describe your family's interaction with Ms. Bishop? Vivian exhaled, hands folded in her lap. We were surprised by her presence in Charles's life. She was, and I say this with great restraint, not a conventional match. Hendricks nodded. And did she attempt to manipulate the relationship for personal gain? Vivian straightened. She used race and sex to corner my son. And when that didn't work, she used a child. The courtroom held its breath. Damara's hand curled around the table edge. Naomi whispered, don't breathe. But she already had. And suddenly, the taste in her mouth was metallic. Judge Rowe looked over her glasses. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll remind you, this is not a social gathering. This is a court of law. Do not project assumptions as facts. Vivian blinked, caught, but unrepentant. Naomi rose slowly. Mrs. Whitmore, were you aware of your son's involvement in your company's diversity litigation? Vivian narrowed her eyes. That's irrelevant. Actually, it's deeply relevant. Did your family, at any point, pressure Ms. Bishop to terminate her pregnancy? Silence. Naomi walked forward. Let me rephrase. Do you deny leaving a voicemail in which you stated, and I quote, you don't belong in our lineage? We'll erase you if we have to? Vivian didn't answer. Naomi turned to the judge. No further questions. Amara was called to the stand. She stood slowly, the heat rising up her spine. Her voice was calm, controlled. I never asked Charles for money. Not once. I didn't want a name. I wanted peace. For myself. For my son. She glanced at Charles, who finally looked back at her. But when he sued me for custody, that's when I realized. This isn't about the child. It's about control. It's about punishing me for surviving what he left me with. Judge Rowe nodded, expression unreadable. And Ms. Bishop, Hendricks asked, standing again. Are you saying you've never weaponized your child against Mr. Whitmore? Amara looked him in the eye. I never had a weapon. I only had a child. When the court recessed for lunch, Gia was waiting outside. You didn't flinch, she said, pulling Amara into a hug. Even when they threw everything at you. I wanted to, Amara whispered. I wanted to scream. But you didn't. Because they expect the angry black woman, Amara said. But they fear the one who knows how to speak. There are things you don't forget. Not because they mattered, but because they hurt. Amara had tried for years to forget the sound of Charles's voice from that night. The night he turned from lover to stranger, from father to ghost. But memories, like bruises, don't disappear when ignored. They wait, and sometimes they ring. It started with a noise. A distant ding, barely audible over the hum of the dryer. Micah was asleep. Gia was gone. The apartment felt hollow, like something in it had been waiting for her. She opened the closet to grab an old sweatshirt, and her hand grazed a shoebox buried in the back. She paused. Something buzzed. She pulled the box out. Inside, an old cracked Android. Its screen lit up faintly. Resurrected from years of silence. .1 new voicemail. Dated 3 years ago. Her chest tightened. She hadn't touched that phone since the week she found out she was pregnant. She tapped the icon, and there it was. Charles, recorded. You think keeping this baby makes you powerful? It makes you stupid, Amara. Amara, recorded. It's not a strategy. It's a child. Charles, you do this, you raise it alone. Get rid of it, or you'll regret it forever. A pause. A breath. Charles, I'll make sure you disappear from my world, Amara, and you won't survive it. Click. The recording ended, but Amara couldn't move. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in shallow pulls. Not because it shocked her, but because it confirmed what she had long buried under grace and survival. She stared at the phone in her lap. This wasn't just a voicemail. This was evidenced. The next morning, Naomi sat across from her at the coffee shop, earbuds in, her face locked in a slow burn. When the audio ended, Naomi leaned back and took a long breath. That, she said, is the nail in his legal coffin. Amara stirred her coffee, trying to stop her fingers from shaking. I kept it. All this time. I just forgot. You didn't forget. You survived. That's different. Amara looked out the window, watching Micah chase pigeons with his backpack on. Naomi's voice softened. This changes everything. Back in court, the room was heavier than usual. The air tighter. Naomi stood with the composure of someone who had stopped playing nice. Your Honor, we would like to submit new audio evidence obtained from a previously inactive device belonging to Ms. Bishop. Judge Rowe raised a brow. Admissibility? Time-stamped. Unedited. Preserved under standard chain of custody. And it contains direct threats from Mr. Whitmore to Ms. Bishop regarding the child he now seeks custody of. Charles's lawyer stood, visibly rattled. We object. This is inflammatory, Judge. Rowe held up a hand. Objection noted. Let's hear it. Naomi pressed play. The courtroom stilled. Charles's voice, sharp, impatient, unmistakable, filled the air. You do this, you raise it alone. Get rid of it, or you'll regret it forever. Gasps echoed. Someone in the gallery whispered, Oh my God. Vivian's face dropped in real time, as though a mask had cracked mid-performance. Charles didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. When the clip ended, the silence hung like smoke. Judge Rowe tapped her pen slowly on the bench. I've heard enough. Charles's lawyer tried to recover. Your Honor, if I may, no. You may not. Her tone was colder than steel. The court finds sufficient grounds to question Mr. Whitmore's credibility, intentions, and overall fitness. For custodial rights. Charles finally spoke. That was taken out of context. Rowe looked straight at him. In what context, Mr. Whitmore, makes get rid of it or you'll regret it forever acceptable language to direct at a pregnant partner? Charles opened his mouth, then closed it. Rowe turned to the clerk. We will initiate an immediate psychological and environmental review of Mr. Whitmore's home life. This court suspends all visitation requests until such review is completed and deemed appropriate. Gasps rippled again, softer this time, more like the sound of a throne collapsing. Vivian stood abruptly, whispering something harshly into Charles's ear. He shrugged her off. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Amara didn't stop. She walked past them all, Micah's hand in hers, Naomi flanking her like a bodyguard. One journalist called after her. Ms. Bishop, was that audio the revenge you always planned? Amara turned, just for a moment. No, she said. That was the part he never thought anyone would hear. Later that evening, Gia came over with a bottle of wine and a bag of frozen dumplings. You know the news is calling you the voice memo mother now, right? She said, handing Amara a plate. God, I hate the internet. You love it when it drags the powerful. Okay, fair. They sat on the couch, half watching reruns and half scrolling through Twitter. Naomi had texted earlier. You turn the tide today. Now we row. Amara hadn't responded. She stared at the screen, heart still pacing. Gia nudged her. How do you feel? I don't know, Amara whispered. Like I won, but I also bled. Justice usually feels like that. She looked. Down the hall where Micah's door was cracked open, soft lights spilling out. He still doesn't know what's happening. Gia nodded. Good. That means you're doing something right. Later, alone, Amara lay awake in bed. She played the audio again, not because she needed to hear it, but because she needed to believe it existed, that she hadn't made it up, that she wasn't crazy, that everything they tried to bury had, at last, unearthed itself. She whispered to the dark. You thought I'd forget, Charles. But survival keeps better records than silence ever could. And this time, she slept without nightmares. The courtroom had never been this quiet. Even the hum of the ceiling lights seemed to hush when Amara rose from her seat. She didn't glance at Charles, didn't search for Vivian's gaze or Madison's hidden smirk in the gallery. She only looked forward, toward the stand, the oath, the woman in the black robe who held her future like a pendulum. Judge Rowe gave a small nod. Miss Bishop, you may proceed. Amara placed her hand on the Bible and repeated the words. Her voice caught just slightly at the end, but she didn't cough or clear her throat. She let the tremble stand. She had earned every quiver. Naomi stepped back, arms folded, as Amara sat in the witness chair. The court clerk adjusted the mic. Amara leaned in. My name is Amara Bishop, she began, and I'm the mother of Micah. Her hands rested in her lap, folded gently, but her voice grew stronger with each word. I met Charles Whitmore my second year of law school. I was on a full scholarship. He was on full legacy. A few quiet chuckles in the gallery. The judge didn't object. At first, it felt like a movie. Him, with his yachts and designer shoes. Me, with 2 pairs of jeans and a student loan notice. Stuck to my fridge with a cracked magnet. She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed sharp. I didn't grow up around money. I grew up around people who had to beg the electric company for extensions. People who took double shifts and still bought milk and coins. So when I got into Columbia, I swore I wouldn't need anyone. Not a man. Not even luck. She paused. Her voice softened, but then I fell in love. She looked toward Micah's photograph, now sitting quietly on Naomi's desk. Charles told me I was different. Smart. Beautiful. He said he'd never met someone who challenged him and made him laugh in the same breath. She laughed once, just enough to say I see the irony now. But love, in certain circles, has conditions. And when I told him I was pregnant, those conditions cracked. She let the next words land like stone. He told me to get rid of it, or I'd regret it forever. Gasps again. Softer now. Familiar. Judge Rowe didn't stop her. I had Micah alone. Amara continued. I bled alone. I signed the birth certificate alone. She inhaled through her nose. And I never asked Charles for anything. Not $1. Not one visit. I didn't tell the press. I didn't try to shame him. I just raised my son. She glanced toward the gallery where Gia sat, hand pressed. Over her mouth, I worked 2 jobs. Finished school. I would study while rocking Micah to sleep in a wrap. I delivered food until midnight, wrote briefs at 3 a.m., and made peanut butter sandwiches in the morning before walking him to daycare. Naomi gave her the faintest nod, still calm, still standing. But what hurt more than the fatigue was the questions. Her voice lowered. Micah turned 4 and asked why his dad didn't come to birthdays. Why he didn't call. Why other kids had photos of their fathers at school, and he didn't. A juror dabbed their eye. I told him the truth, but gently, that some people need time to find their courage. She turned her head, looked directly at Charles for the first time. I came here today to say, that time's up. Charles shifted, but said nothing. His lawyer rose now. Mr. Hendricks, stiff as starch. Ms. Bishop, he began. Your testimony is emotional. We understand. But emotions can sometimes cloud judgment. Naomi frowned but stayed seated. Amara tilted her head slightly. Are you saying motherhood is a clouded judgment? Hendricks coughed. Of course not. I'm saying, people sometimes act out of spite. You're implying I'm here for revenge. I'm saying, Hendricks replied, that it's possible this lawsuit, this performance, is an attempt to embarrass the Whitmore family. Amara straightened. Embarrassment requires guilt. Gasps again. Someone whispered, she's good. Hendricks pressed on. You made multiple public statements, televised, even. Would you say you deliberately used the media to manipulate public opinion? I didn't leak the story, Amara said calmly. I just refused to hide. And yet you refused financial settlement in exchange for privacy. Why? Because silence is what abusers buy. I'm not for sale. Judge Rowe raised her eyes at that. Hendricks tried one last blow. You're a brilliant woman, Ms. Bishop. But brilliance can turn bitter. Do you hate Mr. Whitmore? Amara was silent for a long time. When she spoke, it was barely a whisper, but it cut through every corner of the courtroom. I don't hate him. She looked toward Micah's photo again. I hate what my son could inherit if I stayed quiet. She turned to the jury. I didn't come here for revenge. I came so my son wouldn't inherit silence. The words hung like thunder that had already struck. Naomi stood slowly. No further questions, Your Honor. When the recess bell rang, Amara stepped down from the witness stand. Gia met her in the hallway, eyes glossy. You didn't shake, she whispered. Amara exhaled. I was shaking on the inside. Yeah, but out here? You look like a damn queen. Amara smiled, but her shoulders were heavy. You think they believed me? Gia squeezed her hand. They didn't just believe you, she said. You shifted the whole room. Back inside, Judge Rowe addressed the room. I want both parties prepared for final submissions within 2 weeks. At that time, I'll render a decision on custody, visitation, and damages. Charles leaned into his attorney, whispering something heated. Vivian had left 20 minutes earlier, her pearls rattling as she stormed out. Amara stood near the back, watching them, watching the unraveling, not with satisfaction, but with stillness, with power, her kind, the kind they never saw coming. Empires don't fall all at once. They crack, then splinter, then collapse, loudly, publicly, and always with someone still standing in the wreckage, pretending it was just a storm. Amara watched it all unfold from the tiny TV in her apartment kitchen. Micah was eating cereal at the table, swinging his feet. Gia stood behind her, jaw slack, spoon frozen midair. On screen, a headline in red. Breaking, Madison Fontaine accuses Charles Whitmore of coercion, emotional abuse. The video started to play. Madison sat in a velvet chair, hair pulled back, no makeup, voice steady but glass thin. I was 25 when I met Charles. I thought I was in love, but I realized now I was controlled. He isolated me, manipulated my career. He made sure I didn't ask questions about his past, especially the ones that had names like Amara. Amara blinked. Gia dropped her spoon. Is this real? She asked. Amara didn't answer, because the truth was, she had expected the crash, but not the confession, within hours. The dominoes began to fall. A former accountant at Whitmore and Whitmore posted an anonymous thread on X, outlining years of financial misreporting and hush-money contracts. That a paralegal released a folder of internal emails suggesting Charles had deliberately passed over qualified black candidates for promotions. That a janitor uploaded photos of separate interview piles, one labeled standard, the other priority. The names in the priority pile? All Ivy League, all white, mostly male. By morning, the company stock dropped 18%. By lunch, it hit 31%. And by sundown, the SEC had issued a formal investigation. Naomi called around 7 p.m. Do you want to smile or scream? She asked. I want to sleep, Amara replied, half laughing, half exhausted. I just got off the phone with a journalist at The Atlantic. They're planning a full expose. I didn't ask for a spotlight, Naomi. I know, but you cracked the marble. Amara sat down on the couch, eyes on Micah, who was building a castle out of Legos. Has anyone checked on him? She asked Charles. Amara nodded. Naomi paused. He'll have lawyers. But this time, they'll be playing defense. 3 days later, it happened. Charles Whitmore III, heir to a multi-million-dollar legacy, was arrested outside his Westchester office on charges of financial fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of a federal investigation. He was let out in cuffs. No sunglasses. No coat that a camera caught his expression, somewhere between rage and disbelief. Amara watched the footage on her phone in bed that night. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just whispered to the dark, "I warned you." Then came the letters from law firms, from nonprofits, from journalism collectives, legal rights organizations, advocacy centers that "We admire your courage. We would love to bring you on. We're prepared to cover your tuition. Please consider." Amara read them with care. Each one offered escape, recognition, a paycheck, a podium. But when Naomi came over that weekend and found them unopened, she raised an eyebrow. "You're not even tempted?" Amara shook her head. "I thought this would feel like closure," she said. "But it doesn't. It feels like a door I don't need to walk through." Naomi poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. "Then what do you need?" Amara looked toward Micah's room, where soft music played. "Peace," she said. "Just peace." Gia pressed again later. "You could be on the news. Hell, Oprah might call. I don't want to be anyone's poster girl." You took down a billion-dollar dynasty with a courtroom and a voice memo. You deserve your moment. Amara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My moment was when Micah called me mama and knew he was safe." 2 weeks later, the judge finalized her ruling: full legal and physical custody to Amara Bishop. Visitation suspended indefinitely pending psychological review of Charles Whitmore. Backdated child support awarded with penalties. Vivian never showed up to the final hearing. Neither did Charles, just a lawyer in a wrinkled suit, handing over paperwork and swallowing the sentence of legacy undone. Amara walked out of the courthouse. Without fanfare, no cameras, no press, no soundtrack. Just the sound of her own heels on concrete, and Micah's hand in hers. He looked up at her. "Are we done now?" She nodded. "We're done." And for the first time in years, she felt light. Not happy, not triumphant, but free. Amara adjusted the collar of her blazer for the 3rd time. The courtroom was full, buzzing with quiet anticipation, reporters pretending not to be reporters, influencers in sunglasses, and board clerks pretending to be indifferent. But she heard the tension humming beneath the silence. It was the kind of atmosphere that didn't allow air to move freely. Verdict day. Final arguments had been delivered. Testimonies archived. The audio. The accusations. The denial. The silence. The collapse. Now only one thing remained. A decision. Naomi sat beside her, flipping through notes she no longer needed. Across the aisle, Charles sat rigid in a black suit, his hands clutched like they were holding onto the last bit of a name that no longer carried weight. Vivian was absent, probably. A calculated retreat. The Whitmores didn't like to be seen losing. Amara stared ahead. Her palms were dry this time, no trembled, no fear. Just breath and purpose. Judge Esther Rowe entered, robe flowing, gaze unreadable. "All rise." They did. She settled into her chair, set down her folder, and scanned the courtroom with the weight of someone who knew exactly how many lives were about to change. "You may be seated." Chairs creaked. Silence fell again. "This court has reviewed all testimony, evidence, and filings related to the case of Whitmore versus Bishop pertaining to custody and care of minor Micah Bishop Whitmore." Amara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, not to hope, but to witness. Judge Rowe continued, voice firm. "It is the opinion of this court that the petitioner, Mr. Charles Whitmore III, has failed to demonstrate consistent interest, emotional readiness, or safe judgment in regard to the upbringing of his biological son." Charles shifted slightly in his seat, jaw tightening. In contrast, Ms. Amara Bishop has demonstrated resilience, stability, and a consistent commitment to the child's well-being. She has protected him from public scrutiny, financial volatility, and parental absence. Rowe paused. "In short, she has been the parent." A few gasps rippled in the gallery. Amara exhaled slowly, her spine straightening just slightly. "Therefore," Rowe said, her voice echoing, "this court awards sole legal and physical custody to Ms. Bishop, with no visitation granted to Mr. Whitmore at this time." A flash of heat rose to Amara's cheeks, but she didn't flinch. Rowe continued, "Mr. Whitmore shall undergo a full psychological and behavioral review, including anger management therapy and parental fitness evaluation, to be conducted before any future visitation rights are considered." She turned a page deliberately. Additionally, this court grants Ms. Bishop backdated child support retroactive to the birth of the minor, with interest and penalties as calculated under New York state law. A rustle moved through the room. Charles looked like he'd just swallowed glass. But he began, rising slightly in his seat. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering, "Don't. Not now." Roe didn't even glance at him. "Finally," she said, "due to evidence submitted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, this court acknowledges the federal charges pending against Mr. Whitmore for obstruction of justice and interference in a federal investigation. Those proceedings are outside my jurisdiction, but I have been made aware of the warrant issued for his arrest today." A collective inhale from the courtroom. Roe nodded to the bailiff. "You may proceed." Two uniformed officers stepped forward. Amara's heart began to thud, not in triumph, but in the surreal wave of it all, of how long she'd carried this. Alone, quietly, just getting through the day. Charles stood. Slowly, he turned toward the judge, toward the gallery, then finally, toward her. He looked thinner, defeated, but still proud, like a man trained his whole life to believe he could never be caught. His mouth curled, bitter. "This was all you." He spat quietly as they cuffed his wrists. Amara looked at him. Steady, calm, older than the girl he once tried to break. "No," she said simply. "This was you." They led him away. The echo of his footsteps vanished down the hallway. The courtroom remained still. Then Judge Roe closed her folder. "This hearing is adjourned." Outside, the air was cool for a summer morning. Gia stood by the courthouse steps, holding Micah's hand. When he saw Amara, he ran to her. "Mommy." She bent down, caught him in her arms, pressing her forehead to his. "Hey, baby. Did we win?" he asked innocently. She smiled, quiet, full of things she would explain someday. "We're safe," she said. That was enough for now. The press swarmed as expected. Naomi handled it like a seasoned gladiator, swatting questions with short, sharp lines. "No comment at this time. Ms. Bishop will not be giving interviews. Please respect the privacy of a child." But one reporter broke through the chaos, thrusting a mic close. "Amara, what would you say to Charles Whitmore right now if you could?" Amara turned. To him, eyes steady. "I already said it. In court. In silence. In every night, I tucked my son in without a father at the door." And then she turned away. That night, Gia lit candles. They didn't call it a celebration. They called it a moment. Micah fell asleep on the couch, a blanket wrapped around him, cartoon credits still rolling. Naomi raised her glass of tea. "To justice." Amara shook her head. "No," she said, eyes on the sleeping boy. "To truth. Because justice is a system. Truth is a choice." They clinked glasses softly. Later, Amara sat on the balcony alone, moonlight spilling over the city. She thought of everything: the heartbreak, the courtroom, the tape, the humiliation, the courage it took not to disappear when it would have been easier to. She breathed it all in, then let it go, one slow breath at a time. Healing, she realized, doesn't come as a gift. It's the prize you fight for with everything that tried to bury you. And tonight, she felt one step closer. There were no chandeliers, no marble columns, no champagne towers waiting to be poured. Just a patch of city grass, a few folding chairs, and a whiteboard with the words, "Know Your Rights," scribbled in blue marker. Amara stood at the front of the group in jeans and a soft cotton blouse. The air smelled like sunscreen and city dust. Laughter drifted from the nearby playground. Sunlight filtered through a lattice of bare tree branches. It had been 6 months since the verdict. 6 months since the world stopped whispering about the Whitmore scandal and started whispering about the woman who didn't just survive. It changed her. "So if a landlord refuses to return your deposit without proper documentation, what do we do?" Amara asked, pointing to the group of mothers and students sitting on picnic blankets. That a young woman with box braids raised her hand. "File a claim in small claims court?" Amara nodded, smiling. "Exactly. And keep your receipts, always. Courts love receipts." Laughter rippled through the group. The kind of soft laughter that comes from knowing something you didn't know before. The kind that feels like winning a small war. Amara turned to the board, underlining key phrases. She didn't think of herself as a teacher. She just remembered what it felt like not to know who was allowed to speak, and how good it felt the first time someone handed her a mic from the corner of her eye. She spotted Micah running across the park lawn, his curls bouncing, arms stretched like wings that he'd made friends easily since the trial ended. He didn't ask about Charles anymore. Not because he didn't remember, but because now he knew who. Showed up every night, every morning, every time. After the session ended, people began packing up. A few lingered to ask questions. One woman, older, with gentle eyes and a nervous voice, stepped forward slowly. "Excuse me," she said. I. I just wanted to say thank you." Amara turned, brushing chalk dust from her palms. "I didn't get your name," she said. "Deja," the woman replied. "I just moved here from Baltimore. My son's father left when I was 5 months. Pregnant. I watched your case." Amara's face softened. Deja looked down at her hands. I thought I needed a man to complete the picture, to make it official. But then I saw you, and I realized maybe all I needed was to believe. I could finish it myself." Amara blinked slowly. The wind caught a curl by her cheek, and she tucked it behind her ear. She reached forward, touching Deja's hand briefly. "You didn't come here for advice," she said gently. "You came to hear what you already know." Deja smiled, and it was shaky and full of tears that never fell. "Thank you," she whispered. Amara nodded. "No need. Just keep going." Later, Amara sat on a bench, her shoes off, toes curling into the grass. Micah sat beside her eating a fruit cup, sticky fingers brushing against her arm every few minutes. "Did you see me, Mommy?" he asked between bites. "I ran super fast. Like Zoom." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I saw," she said. "You almost took off into the sky." He beamed. Then he turned to her, his tone suddenly serious. "Mommy?" "Yeah, baby. Do you miss him?" She knew who he meant. Charles. She didn't dodge. She didn't flinch. "I don't miss what he did," she said after a long moment. "But sometimes I miss what I hoped he'd be." Micah nodded slowly, as if measuring her words. "Was I a mistake?" That one hit differently. Amara looked down at her son. The same dimples, the same wide eyes that had once belonged to a boy. With too much privilege and too little courage, she cupped his face. "You were the opposite of a mistake. You were the only thing that made sense." He leaned into her palm. That was enough. The sun began to lower, turning the edges of the buildings golden. She watched kids chase each other through the grass. Mothers cleaned juice boxes and corrected math homework on picnic tables. Life moved on, stubbornly and sweetly. Naomi had offered her a position at the legal aid center full-time. She hadn't said yes yet, not because she was afraid, but because, for once, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. Not to Charles, not to the world, not even to herself. She had built something different, something quieter, the kind of joy that didn't need applause. She thought back to that day on the courthouse steps, when the reporter had asked her what she would say to Charles. If given the chance, she'd answered calmly. But now, months later, if he asked her again, was it worth it? She'd tell him this, that she never needed a wedding, never needed white roses or four-tier cakes. She just needed to be believed, to be heard, that to be whole. And that wholeness didn't come from a last name or a ring or a mansion. That it came from choosing herself, over and over again, even when no one else did. Micah leaned into her side now, yawning. "Can we go home, Mommy?" She stood, slipping her shoes back on. "Yes, baby. Let's go home." And, with that, she gathered her bag, held his small hand in hers, and walked away, not from something broken, but towards something beautifully built. Not loud, not perfect, but real and hers.